When I pressed the button on the remote and watched my entire treehouse slowly detach from the tree and roll down the hill, with Karen screaming from the top deck while holding a mimosa, I realized two things at once. 1. This was going to be the most satisfying Tuesday of my life. 2. I should have done this weeks ago when she first called the cops on my swing set. You'd think a woman who trespassed into someone else's private treehouse and held a full-blown lavender brunch inside would have at least asked permission. But no. Karen didn't just steal my treehouse, she claimed it like a pirate landing on a beach. She changed the locks, hung up macrame wall art, and announced to the HOA that it would now be the official meditation hut for the neighborhood. She even gave a speech about communal harmony while sipping cucumber water on my private hammock. But what she didn't know was that this treehouse wasn't just made of wood and rope. It was sitting on a retractable steel chassis with solar panels, satellite internet, and GPS-controlled wheels, and I had the remote. It started 3 months ago when I finished building what I called my engineering masterpiece. I had just left a job designing modular housing units and decided to use my land to test out one of my mobile eco-retreat models. It wasn't just about escaping the noise of the city. This was personal. I had spent years dreaming of this design, one that merged mobility with off-grid living. My treehouse stood tall but sleek in the corner of my wooded property, built into the trunk of a towering oak. From the outside, it looked like a high-end rustic getaway. On the inside, it had smart lighting, a water purification system, and a multi-level platform that could raise or lower with a hydraulic lift. Every inch of it had been engineered with love. Unfortunately, that love was tested the day Karen spotted it from her second-floor balcony. The first complaint came in the form of a typed letter with gold foil edges, slid under my gate like some kind of royal decree. Karen, the self-proclaimed HOA president, wrote that my vertical living structure posed a potential risk to neighborhood property values and violated her personal sense of visual peace. She claimed it blocked the moonlight from reaching her backyard fountain. I laughed at first. Then the fines started rolling in. Unofficial ones, of course. Slips of paper taped to my door with nonsense like unauthorized aerial structure fee, $250. I ignored them, knowing the HOA had no actual jurisdiction over my property line. That didn't sit well with Karen. Her efforts escalated like a bad sequel. She held community meetings about it. She even tried to file a noise complaint over wind chimes I didn't own. And then came the day I left for a weekend camping trip. When I returned Sunday afternoon, my front gate was wide open and the treehouse looked different. From a distance, I saw white curtains flapping out of the windows, string lights twinkling from the deck, and what appeared to be a yoga mat unrolled in the middle of the main room. Confused, I walked up the hill, and stopped dead when I saw a group of people in yoga pants lounging on my furniture like they were at a spa retreat. Karen, in a pink tracksuit and oversized sunglasses, stood near the kitchenette arranging a cheese board. "Namaste," she said, like this was some kind of welcome party. When I asked what in the world was going on, she tilted her head and said, "We've appropriated this space for community healing." It was too beautiful to be private. I was too stunned to respond. Too stunned, that is, until she added, "Don't worry, we brought our own crystals." Apparently, Karen had broken in using a ladder, disabled the smart lock with a kitchen knife, and claimed squatters' rights based on a clause she misread in a landscaping brochure. She even posted on the neighborhood message board that the treehouse was open to all spiritually aligned HOA members. One woman was literally burning sage in my reading nook. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I just smiled, backed away slowly, and walked down to my truck. There, hidden under the driver's seat, was the silver briefcase containing the remote. A matte black device with a series of buttons and a fingerprint sensor, connected via private server to the backup battery bank in the treehouse's foundation. I flipped open the protective cover, pressed the activation button, and waited. A soft mechanical hum echoed through the trees. From the hilltop, I saw the structure vibrate slightly, then begin its descent. The treehouse was on a reinforced carbon fiber chassis with 4 oversized all-terrain wheels, each powered by a silent electric motor. The entire platform lowered from the branches like a slow-moving elevator, a process that usually took 60 seconds but felt like an eternity as Karen and her brunch guests started screaming in confusion. One woman dropped her fruit parfait. Another clung to a hanging plant like it was a lifeline. Karen shouted something about calling the sheriff. I pressed another button and the treehouse started rolling. Slowly at first, like a cautious parade float. But once it cleared the hill, the wheels found traction and it picked up a little speed, following a preset GPS path I had created years ago for test runs. The path led through my backwoods trail, across a low footbridge, and into the forest buffer zone that bordered county land. I could see it all from the app. Internal cameras showed Karen flailing as her yoga mats slid across the floor. One of the speakers, still connected to the house system, began playing nature audio, birdsong and babbling brooks. It was glorious. From a safe distance, I watched as the treehouse carried Karen and her unwilling passengers deeper into the woods. I knew they were safe. There were emergency stop features, padded interiors, and a fully stocked fridge. But none of that mattered to Karen, who was now trapped in a structure she had claimed as her own, now being piloted remotely by the man she tried to bully out of existence. It was the most poetic revenge I'd ever engineered. What came next would turn my quiet life upside down. Karen's husband would call the police. News crews would arrive. There would be lawsuits, camera crews, audits, and internet infamy. But in that moment, as I leaned against my truck watching a woman who tried to steal my dream retreat get slowly chauffeured into the woods by the very tech she had mocked, I felt peace. Real, undisturbed, karmically delicious peace. And it had wheels. The treehouse rolled deeper into the woods at a casual, almost majestic pace, its solar-charged wheels crunching gently over leaves and pine needles. Inside, chaos reigned. Karen was flailing around in a panic, trying to figure out how to open the doors that were now locked from the inside by default safety protocol. Her guests, including a yoga instructor, 2 HOA board members, and some poor woman named Marlene who just came for the tea, were all yelling over one another. Where are we going? Is this legal? Are we being kidnapped? Karen, ever the leader of nonsense, grabbed one of my throw pillows like it was a military radio and started shouting into it like it could communicate with the outside world. When that failed, she tried kicking the sliding glass door, which didn't budge, because I had designed it to withstand wildlife and 100 miles per hour winds. A squirrel couldn't break in, and neither could Karen's flats. Meanwhile, I was parked in my driveway with a bag of popcorn, watching the entire ordeal unfold from the house's internal cameras via my laptop. Each camera was labeled: kitchen, deck, reading loft, bathroom, hallway. Every feed gave me a front-row seat to the meltdown inside the treehouse. I could hear Karen screaming about lawsuits and demanding someone find the break. I chuckled as she stormed into the kitchenette and found a drawer labeled emergency. Inside, she discovered protein bars, thermal blankets, and a laminated evacuation guide. No remote, no override button. She read it like it was written in alien code and then crumpled it up, declaring the document unconstitutional. The treehouse, however, remained unfazed. It reached the end of the gravel trail and smoothly transitioned onto a wide, dirt path I had reinforced years earlier. What Karen didn't know was that the entire route was mapped and pre-tested. It had stop points, backup power, and a silent alarm that pinged me if anything actually went wrong. From the outside, it looked like a panic-inducing disaster. From the inside of my brain, it was a flawless software demonstration. I tapped a button on the control panel, and the house entered tour mode. An automatic voice played over the interior speakers. Welcome to the Arbor Escape, a state-of-the-art mobile eco-retreat. Please remain calm as we travel through Mark's private forest. Fun fact: these trees are over 70 years old and are home to over 24 species of native birds. Karen looked like she was going to explode. Back in the neighborhood, things were escalating. Karen's husband, Todd, who always looked like he lived one panic attack away from becoming a ghost, was calling 911 with trembling fingers. "Yes, officer, my wife is in a runaway treehouse. No, it's not a metaphor. No, I haven't been drinking." By the time the dispatcher transferred him to someone who might take this seriously, Todd had roped in 2 other HOA members who gathered at the curb with binoculars and a lawn chair. Across the street, my neighbor Phil brought out his drone and launched it for a better view, laughing as he piloted it toward the treetops to catch footage. A small crowd formed as word spread. Half the block was now live-streaming Todd's meltdown and the treehouse's slow disappearance into the woods. Then came the moment I had secretly hoped for. A local news van, hearing scanner chatter about a mobile home kidnapping, showed up and started filming. The reporter, a young guy trying to make a name for himself, stood at the gate and delivered a dramatic intro. Breaking news out of West Pinewood Estates, where a neighborhood dispute has turned into what some are calling a rolling hostage situation involving a remote-controlled treehouse. The man behind it? A reclusive engineer turned apparent prankster. And the victim? The HOA president known only as Karen. He didn't even bother hiding the smirk when he said her name. Inside the treehouse, Karen was trying to climb onto the reading loft and wave out a skylight. Marlene, clutching a soy latte and visibly regretting her friendship choices, sat in the corner muttering prayers. The yoga instructor attempted to bring some calm by leading a breathing session, but the deck began to tilt slightly as the path shifted uphill, and everyone panicked again. I watched as Karen tried to anchor herself using a curtain rod, only for it to snap off dramatically and send her tumbling into a beanbag. Her yelp echoed through my speakers like music. The treehouse slowed to a halt near a clearing. A small wooden platform with a built-in campfire pit came into view. It was one of my favorite spots on the trail, complete with solar lights and a wind chime that sang whenever the breeze passed through. I activated the pause and enjoy function, and the voice came back. "You have reached Vista Point. Please take a moment to enjoy nature. Did you know raccoons can open over 30 types of containers?" Karen bellowed something about raccoons not being her concern right now, just as a curious one actually wandered into the clearing and looked up at the structure. The inside cam caught Marlene shrieking as the animal sniffed near the step. Karen grabbed a yoga mat and threw it like a frisbee in a wild attempt to scare it off. I was still laughing when my phone rang. "Unknown number," I answered. "Mark speaking," I said calmly. "You son of a—" Karen's voice erupted on speaker. "You roll this treehouse back to my lawn right now or I will have you arrested for terrorism." I sipped my drink and let the silence linger. "Karen," I replied slowly, "you broke into my treehouse, hosted a yoga brunch, and declared it community property. I'm simply escorting unauthorized guests off my land. It's an automated demo, not a crime." She growled in frustration and screamed something about the Geneva Convention, which I'm fairly certain doesn't apply to eco-architecture. Meanwhile, back at the neighborhood, Todd was in full meltdown mode. The news reporter had coaxed him into giving a live statement, during which Todd admitted he didn't actually know how she got inside the treehouse, and maybe she's misunderstood sometimes. The HOA's vice president, Greg, tried to distance the group from Karen entirely, saying they had no knowledge of her actions and that this is between her and the tree guy. By the end of the segment, Phil's drone footage was airing on TV, showing Karen with her arms flailing wildly like she was stuck in a haunted amusement ride. The treehouse stayed parked at Vista Point for the next hour while I let them cool down. Eventually, the sky began to dim as sunset approached. I tapped the return route button. The structure slowly turned around and began its journey back down the hill, this time taking the longer path that passed 2 more observation decks and a wildlife camera station. I could hear Karen in the background yelling, "Not again!" as the voice resumed. "As we return to base, please consider the ways you can be a better neighbor. Step 1. Don't steal people's treehouses. I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee as the house crept back toward civilization. When it emerged from the trees an hour later, the crowd at the curb erupted into cheers and laughter. People clapped. Someone even whistled. Karen didn't emerge immediately. When the door finally opened, she stomped out with leaves in her hair and dirt on her sweater, looking like a washed-up reality star who just got voted off the island. She didn't say a word, just marched past the news crew and into her house while Todd trailed behind like a wet sponge. I stood there smiling, saying nothing. But I knew this was just the beginning. Karen would not go down quietly. The war had started. And next time, I wouldn't just roll her into the woods. I had plans. And a whole set of treehouse upgrades she still hadn't seen. By the next morning, the footage had already gone viral. Every corner of the internet seemed to have latched onto the saga of a rogue treehouse, a roguer Karen, and a man with a remote. Memes flooded the neighborhood group chats and spread across Reddit faster than wildfire. There was one where someone had photoshopped the treehouse rolling through different historic moments, like the moon landing and the O.J. Simpson chase. Another showed Karen's terrified face superimposed on a roller coaster with the caption, "Next stop, consequences." I didn't even have time to pour my coffee before the first email landed in my inbox from a national news producer asking if I'd be willing to talk. I ignored it for now. Karen, however, was not staying quiet. No, she had turned from suburban tyrant into full-blown martyr overnight. She gathered what was left of her dignity and hosted a press conference in her front yard. With a neck brace on, yes, a neck brace, she stood behind a foldable podium and declared that she was the victim of a premeditated attack. "I was kidnapped," she said into the microphone, flanked by two half-committed HOA members and a man holding a yoga mat like it was a protest sign. "This individual, Mark, used advanced technology to detain me and my guests against our will in a moving building with no lawful authority." The only thing missing was dramatic background music. Her speech had all the flair of a daytime courtroom drama. She claimed I had psychologically tortured her with automated forest sounds and robotic voices. She said the experience had left her emotionally paralyzed, and then pivoted to blaming me for fracturing the trust within the HOA community. She even demanded I be investigated for domestic terrorism. The crowd of 10 looked confused, especially when one of them, Marlene, stepped forward and whispered, "Karen, we were inside a luxury treehouse with snacks. It wasn't Guantanamo." That clip alone would be played over 10 million times within 2 days. By noon, I had a letter taped to my mailbox from her attorney. Cease and desist. Legal jargon. Demands. Threats. It was all there, written on fancy embossed paper with gold trim, like they were announcing a wedding instead of a lawsuit. But I wasn't just some backwoods inventor. I had receipts, literal and legal. The blueprints for the treehouse, the surveillance footage from the internal cameras, GPS logs, and most importantly, a detailed report filed months ago with the county confirming the structure was both private and fully permitted. Karen didn't trespass onto some vague property line. She entered a locked, engineered structure that had more documentation than her entire HOA board combined. That's when I made my move. I contacted my cousin Sheila, an environmental lawyer with a firecracker personality and zero tolerance for idiot. Sheila took one look at the footage and said, "Oh, this is better than reality TV. We're going on offense." She filed a countersuit within 24 hours, claiming illegal trespassing, property damage, attempted squatting, and defamation. The best part? We attached a USB drive with video clips from the internal cameras. Karen posing on my hammock like she was royalty, Karen ordering people around inside my kitchen, Karen throwing a yoga mat at a raccoon. We didn't just build a legal case, we built a cinematic experience. That's when the media really sank its teeth in. Local news turned into national segment. A primetime host called it the Great Treehouse Heist. Reddit crowned me their new folk hero. I became remote control Mark, and Karen, unfortunately for her, became Mobile Menace Karen. TikTok creators reenacted the scene with Lego sets and Barbie dolls. One YouTuber did a full-length dramatic reading of her press conference set to orchestra music. The momentum was snowballing, and Karen was spiraling. Her next mistake was going live on Facebook. She fired up her phone in selfie mode, face tight with rage, and delivered an unhinged monologue that started with, "I don't care what the internet thinks," and ended with her threatening to start her own neighborhood militia to patrol property lines. In between, she made bizarre references to Treehouse surveillance, electromagnetic harassment, and something about pine cones being government microphones. It was clear she had lost control of the narrative, and maybe a few other things too. Then, the auditors arrived. It turned out, once the county caught wind of her antics and saw just how publicly she was dragging the HOA's name through the mud, they started poking around. Permits, budgets, spending records, all of it was now under scrutiny. And guess what surfaced? Her gazebo. That ornate monstrosity in her backyard with marble pillars and fairy lights strung like it was Versailles? Built without proper approval, on a setback violation, using funds that mysteriously came out of the HOA's landscaping account. Suddenly, the people who once followed her orders were now tripping over each other to distance themselves. The HOA vice president resigned. 2 treasurers claimed ignorance, and the new interim board voted to suspend her from all official duties pending further review. Her kingdom was crumbling. The cherry on top came when the city inspector showed up at my gate. I braced myself for a fight. Instead, he stepped out of his truck, walked up with a clipboard and said, "So this is the famous treehouse, huh? Mind if I take a look?" He climbed the stairs, spent 15 minutes poking around, and then asked me if I'd ever consider building a similar model for public use. I gave him the tour, explained the specs, and showed off the hydraulic platform. When I finished, he whistled and said, "You know, my daughter's birthday is coming up. Ever thought of licensing this design?" That's when it hit me. Karen had done more than just try to steal my sanctuary. She had accidentally launched my business into orbit. By the end of the week, I had offers from 2 venture firms, an email from an outdoor travel company, and a DM from a Netflix scout. Meanwhile, Karen was last seen at the grocery store arguing with a cashier about whether pineapples counted as a taxable luxury. Her HOA badge had been confiscated. Her gazebo was under demolition order, and her once loyal followers now referred to her as that treehouse lady with visible embarrassment. And yet, even in the midst of all this, I knew she wasn't finished. Karen wasn't the type to fade quietly into a cautionary tale. No, she was wounded. And people like her don't reflect, they reload. That's what made me double-check the treehouse security. I updated the remote firmware, strengthened the camera encryption, installed a motion-triggered foghorn on the lower deck, just in case. Because if Karen thought her biggest mistake was stealing my treehouse, she hadn't yet considered what would happen when the entire town started asking me to build one for them, and not her. Her days of HOA rule were over. Mine were just beginning. Just when I thought the saga had reached its hilarious and poetic peak, a twist unraveled that even I hadn't seen coming. The entire time Karen was busy flinging lawsuits, press statements, and dramatic videos online, she had no idea she wasn't just messing with a guy who built a treehouse for fun. She was interfering with a federally funded prototype tied to a larger innovation grant. That's right, my little treehouse on wheels, which she had casually broken into and hosted cucumber water brunches inside, was actually part of a government-backed initiative for sustainable off-grid housing. What Karen thought was some eccentric man's toy was, in reality, a fully registered project titled Ecomobile Autonomous Living Structure Unit, or EMALSU for short. When my phone buzzed with a reminder about the upcoming demo presentation scheduled for the Department of Innovation and Infrastructure, I nearly spit out my coffee. See, before all this HOA madness started, I'd partnered with an environmental tech incubator that supports green housing startup. They'd given me a small grant to develop a mobile shelter capable of autonomous off-grid living for disaster-prone areas. The Treehouse was meant to demonstrate how you could take sustainable tech into hard-to-reach zones, deploy housing quickly, and keep it functional without municipal utilities. The retractable wheels, solar array, water recycler, and smart sensors weren't just luxury features. They were proof of concept for modular field housing. I had every inch of it documented, photographed, and filed with the city as part of a registered beta site. Karen's intrusion had thrown a wrench into my timeline, but ironically, her stunt gave me exactly what I needed: a real-world trial under unpredictable conditions. The moment I updated the innovation team about what happened, their response wasn't concern. It was curiosity. They asked for the footage. Every second of Karen stumbling around inside, trying to command the environment like she owned it, became valuable data. How did an untrained user interact with the controls? How did the structure respond to chaotic movement? Did the audio narration calm or enrage test subject? One rep even said, "This is exactly the kind of unpredictable human behavior we needed to evaluate stress scenarios." I wasn't just vindicated, I was now sitting on a high-profile case study. Meanwhile, Karen was imploding. The county had begun formal audits into her activities as HOA president. Her fake permits, misuse of HOA funds, and unauthorized modifications to community spaces were stacking up like Jenga blocks ready to collapse. She held one last emergency meeting in a desperate attempt to reassert power. No one showed up, except a neighborhood teen live streaming her speech and whispering mock commentary behind the camera. At one point, Karen declared that Mark's Treehouse was a psyop by the state, and the chat exploded with laughing emojis. She didn't know it yet, but her downfall had gone international. A clip of her holding a crystal and shouting about solar espionage had been dubbed in multiple languages and posted on global meme accounts. Her HOA throne had been pulled out from under her, and I, the once mocked recluse at the edge of the cul-de-sac, was now the unofficial community legend. My inbox was overflowing. Invitations to speak at innovation conferences, requests for interviews, licensing offers. A reality show producer even pitched a series called Off-Grid Genius, where I'd travel around solving neighborhood disputes using gadgets. I declined the show but kept the offers rolling. Meanwhile, I began working with a legal team to patent the Amalsu Treehouse design fully. The name Karen had tried to drag through the mud was now on legal documents, trade publications, and yes, even fan merchandise. But the part that really sealed her fate wasn't public humiliation. It was the money. When I announced that I had secured a 7-figure licensing deal with a wilderness retreat company to build 10 custom mobile treehouses based on my design, the entire neighborhood practically held a block party. One neighbor sent me a bouquet with a card that read, "Thanks for turning her tantrum into a TED Talk." I laughed, not because of the money itself, but because the very thing she hated, the structure she tried to claim and control, had now become the reason she was being investigated for fraud. If she had left it alone, it might have quietly passed into prototype obscurity. But she elevated it. She turned it into a movement. The city sent another inspector, this time not to evaluate the treehouse, but to begin formal condemnation procedures on Karen's illegal gazebo. That marble mess in her yard was found to be built on a protected easement. When workers arrived to cordon it off, she came outside in full regalia, a robe, slippers, and a plastic tiara, and yelled that they were trespassing on sacred HOA ground. They gave her 5 minutes to retrieve personal items before they began dismantling it. She used that time to take selfies and post a farewell tribute on Facebook titled, "Goodbye to my garden throne." It got 3 likes and 1 laughing reaction from someone named Donna. As her influence vanished, Karen became increasingly erratic. She left passive-aggressive notes in mailboxes, tried to run for HOA office under a new title called Community Morality Director, and even called a local AM radio station claiming she had been targeted by a shadowy organization of builders. But no one was listening anymore. The neighbors she used to bully were now waving to me with warm smiles and baked goods. The same people who feared her clipboard now offered to help clean my trail or paint the new Treehouse deck. It was surreal but satisfying. I installed new upgrades into the Treehouse as part of the commercial package rollout. The beta unit, my original one, was retrofitted with a retractable security gate, an anti-intrusion alarm that played accordion music at full volume, and a pop-up turret that deployed an inflatable sign reading "Private Property. Stay back." It was part deterrent, part performance art. A little dramatic? Sure. But after everything, I felt it was earned. Karen, on the other hand, had vanished from view. Rumor had it she was trying to start a rival HOA down the road, recruiting anyone who would listen. So far, her only members were a confused elderly man and a cat. She still wore her tiara around the grocery store. She still ranted to anyone who made eye contact too long. But she had become a punchline, a walking cautionary tale about hubris and hammock. I had gone from the weirdo with a treehouse to the neighborhood's resident innovator, and all it took was one wildly entitled woman, one bad decision, and one very powerful remote. But I knew better than to assume she was gone forever. People like Karen don't admit defeat. They smolder, regroup, and wait for an opportunity. And something told me deep in my gut that she wasn't done. Not quite yet. The only question was how far she'd go the next time, and whether she was ready for Treehouse 2.0. Because now, the structure she once tried to claim wasn't just my sanctuary. It was a fortress, a business, a symbol, and if she ever dared to trespass again, I had a whole new set of surprises waiting just behind the solar panels. It started with a rustle, a subtle crunch of gravel in the dead of night, the kind of sound that makes you glance toward a window without even realizing why. I was sitting inside the treehouse working on new schematics for the off-grid version 2.0 when I heard it. Just barely, like footsteps trying not to be footsteps. I muted the music and listened. Another sound. This time, it was metal clicking softly against wood. I knew that sound well. It was the hatch handle on the lower deck being tampered with. And there was only one person arrogant enough, reckless enough, and petty enough to try climbing into my now world-famous treehouse in the middle of the night. Karen was back. Part of me expected it. Her fall from grace had been too loud, too dramatic, and too incomplete to stay final. Her HOA empire was gone, her reputation buried beneath memes and audits, and her neighborhood allies had long since abandoned her. But Karen wasn't the retreating kind. She was the type who'd keep a grudge like a treasured heirloom. And now, apparently, she'd decided that if she couldn't control the treehouse legally, she'd storm it like a rogue crusader. I tapped a button on my phone and brought up the security camera feed. There she was, wearing what looked like black leggings, a hoodie with rhinestones, and shoes entirely unsuited for stealth. She was holding a duffel bag and struggling to attach a cheap rope ladder to the deck railing. I blinked in disbelief. She got one foot on the first rung before it collapsed under her weight. The camera caught her landing in the bushes with a muffled thump, followed by several whispered curses and something about the ladder being defective. I watched her get up, brush off twigs, and then circle the tree like she was trying to find a cheat code. I could have ended it right there. I could have triggered the floodlights or set off the alarm. But something in me needed to see how far she'd go, what her endgame really was. So I waited. After several failed attempts and a loud argument with a mosquito, she managed to climb the back utility stairway, unaware that it activated a silent alert. I watched as she slowly cracked the deck door, flashlight clenched between her teeth, and slipped inside. She was in. She made it. And for about 30 seconds she acted like she'd conquered a nation. She walked around with her arms folded like a villain giving a TED talk to ghosts. "Mine again," she whispered, shining her light on my carefully arranged tools, the loft, and the updated control panel. She didn't know the cameras were watching her from every angle, or that I was too. Then came the moment she tried to plug in her phone and take a selfie on the hammock again. The instant she touched the outlet, I triggered the internal deterrent protocol. A booming voice filled the treehouse, pre-recorded in my own voice. Unauthorized access detected. Please exit the premises. You have 10 seconds to comply. Karen dropped her phone and screamed. She scrambled backward into the kitchenette, knocking over a thermos of herbal tea I'd left on the counter. This is a misunderstanding, she shouted into the air like someone was going to respond kindly. I tapped a second button. The windows sealed with automated locks. The overhead lights shifted to red. The screen embedded in the main wall turned on and played her own greatest hits. The brunch footage, her lawn press conference, and her livestream about electromagnetic harassment. Her voice echoed through the structure as her expression turned from smug to horrified. She tried opening the front door, but it was locked tight. She ran to the loft window and found it sealed. Finally, in desperation, she lunged for the main control panel and tried pressing buttons randomly. That's when I activated the final trick. A mechanical hum kicked in, the wheels unlocked, and the treehouse began to move again. Slowly. Majestically. Right off the platform and down the trail, just like before. Karen let out a sound that could only be described as a wounded bagpipe. I stood on the hill, arms folded, watching it glide away into the darkness like a high-tech ghost ship. This time I hadn't packed snacks. This time there were no guests. Just Karen, alone in her own absurd reckoning, heading toward the forest. I took a slow breath and followed at a distance in my truck, watching through the app as the treehouse paused at Vista Point again, where it gently played the same calming audio from last time. Breathe in peace, breathe out entitlement. But unlike last time, she didn't panic or scream as much. She sat in the middle of the deck, defeated, hugging her duffel bag, swaying slightly. Something had cracked inside her. Or maybe she was finally starting to understand that she couldn't win this. That no matter how many times she tried to control the narrative, reality, and technology were far better at telling the truth. By morning, I drove out and manually retrieved the treehouse, guiding it back along the trail while Karen slumped against the kitchenette counter like a stranded guest at the worst Airbnb ever. When I parked it back in place, I opened the deck door and looked at her for a long moment. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me, eyes bloodshot, hair a mess, and whispered, "I just wanted things to go back to how they were." I almost felt bad. Almost. But then she added, "Before you moved in with your circus machine." And that was enough to shut the door again. I called her sister, who lived in the next town over and had apparently been waiting for a phone call like this. She came and picked Karen up without a word, barely making eye contact as she loaded her into the back seat. I watched them drive off, finally, mercifully, quietly. No parting screams. No lawsuits waved out the window. Just silence. In the days that followed, something strange happened. Peace returned. No more random violations pinned to my gate. No more flyers about mandatory lawn color schemes. The HOA, now restructured with actual decent people, invited me to give a talk at the community center about sustainable living. I declined but offered to build them a stationary garden shed version of the treehouse for free, as a gesture of goodwill. They accepted with such enthusiasm it nearly startled me. Neighbors began walking by more often, waving, asking questions about the tech. One family even asked if they could book a weekend in one of my future models when I opened them to the public. The once tense neighborhood had evolved, and oddly enough, Karen had been the catalyst. Not because of her vision, but because of her mistakes. The final touch came a week later. A letter. Handwritten. Sloppy. Unfolded carefully on my workshop table, it simply read, "I was wrong. Don't think I'll say it twice. Karen." No threats. No blame. Just a begrudging concession scribbled in half-hearted ink. I stared at it for a while, then tucked it away in the top drawer under the original treehouse blueprint. Karen didn't come back. Not physically, anyway. Her legacy lingered in jokes, in neighborhood lore, in the warning tales passed on to new residents. But she had finally learned what I knew from the start: you can take over a lawn, a committee, even a treehouse if you're bold enough. But if you don't understand the roots underneath it all, it's only a matter of time before the whole thing rolls away. Literally.